Now, I want to give you a call of the card. For some of you who might remember the campaign launch that Julia Gillard did, there was a good 20 minutes beforehand where Bob Hawke was gesticulating and telling people that politics is like a horse race. You need to follow the form, you need to have a look at the track and a few other things. So I'll give you a call of the card as the Parliament stands at the moment, and I think you'll see how it is we came to this gridlock. When you look at the Parliament as three distinct zones, we're obviously on another planet compared to the other two zones, but I'll just walk you through them. And I'll start at the top of Australia with the two mining states, Queensland and Western Australia, and the Northern Territory. Lump the three of them together, and they all behaved quite distinctly compared with the rest of the nation. Going into this election, and this is the aftermath of the 2007 election plus the redistribution of the boundaries, Labor had 24 of the 47 seats in what I call the mining states, Queensland, WA and the Northern Territory, a very narrow majority. The second group, which I define as the southern states, which is Victoria, South Australia, Tasmania, and we'll just chuck in the ACT for cultural reasons. Going into this election, Labor had 34 of the 55. Now, bear in mind what I'm doing here. I'm slicing the Parliament and the nation up into three roughly equal zones. Now, between the mining states and the southern states, there's this thing called New South Wales. Now, nobody quite knows what New South Wales is at the moment. For want of a better phrase, I call it a dead state. Now, coming into this election, Labor had 30 of the 48 seats. So Labor had a majority across each of the three zones. Now, what is unusual in this election is Labor maintained its majority in the bottom two zones, in the southern states and in New South Wales. No government has ever lost office before with a majority of the seats in Victoria, New South Wales, let alone Tassie, South Australia and the ACT. So this is why this, as first principle, this is a very weird result. Anyway, I'll take you back to what happened in 2010, and we'll leave the doubtful seats to one side. Labor had its numbers in the mining states halved from 24 to 12. The coalition went from 22 to 32. Now, the election was pretty much decided there. Gillard lost a majority in Queensland and, to a lesser extent, in the Northern Territory and Western Australia. We'll work out why that happened in a sec, but just hold those numbers there. There are a couple of doubtful seats there too, and there's also an independent. Bob Catter happens to be the mining states representative in the Force for Independence. Now, in the southern states, remember Labor began at 34, the coalition at 31. Labor at the moment are at 33. The coalition are at 19, so they're down 2. The independents are up 1, which is Andrew Wilkie, and the Greens are up 1. Now, what's distinctive about the Green seat of Melbourne and Denison? The two things that set these seats apart from all others, apart from tertiary education, are that they are the number 1 and 2 seats for working women in Australia. Now, whatever it is that Julia had going with the working women across Australia, amongst the elites of Melbourne and Hobart, she turned them the other way. She sent them Green or Independent. It's a very important switch within the southern states. I mean, this is a killing zone for the coalition, but for Labor, the base revolt is already underway, and we've seen it in the evidence on Saturday. Now, in New South Wales, and this is the thing that surprised everyone, there was quite a substantial swing against the government in New South Wales, but it was bigger in Sydney than it was in the bush. Labor had 30 seats going into it and have come out with 26. They still have the majority in New South Wales, 26 of the 48. The coalition's pickups of 4 include Bennelong, which was a once for Labor. It's a lifelong coalition seat. In the seat of Macarthur, which was notionally given to Labor, it was actually a coalition seat. In the seat of Gilmore, which was notionally given to Labor, it's actually a coalition seat. There's only one seat in that quartet that could arguably said was in contest, in play, and was taken off Labor, and that's the seat of Macquarie. But even that had a sitting Liberal member who jumped from another seat. So pretty much nothing happened in New South Wales to speak of that would affect the election result. And in fact, it's the absence of a comparable seat swing to Queensland that denied Tony Abbott the Prime Ministership in his own right. Now think this one through. He's the home state boy. He couldn't call on a home state advantage. Julia Gillard had 2 home states to play. She grew up in South Australia and made her life here in Victoria. She's picked up seats at the expense of the coalition, but also bled a couple of seats to her left. So you're looking at possibly the strangest election result you'll ever get in Australia, but a result that is going to be increasingly more common because take a step back and wonder why the mining states swung as dramatically as they did. The mining states are at near full employment. These are also the shortage economies in Australia. They are grumpy as all get up in Queensland and in Western Australia. In New South Wales, systems failure, a poor state government doesn't make anyone angry from one year to the next. What's made people in Queensland especially angry from one election to the next is the thing called the GFC that landed in the middle of it. The GFC 2008-9, in a macro sense, we avoided the global recession, but in a micro sense, in a place like Queensland, the unemployment rate shot up quite dramatically. They've got some strange things going on in Queensland that people down here may be seeing the start of, but don't quite relate to in the same way. Extraordinary housing shortages, shortages of tradespeople, shortages of goods and services, partly because the mining economy is sucking everything out of the rest of Queensland. Can't get a tradesman if a tradesman is still employable in Queensland because they're all on the mining sites. A government can't compete with the mining economy because the government can't keep up with the infrastructure demands, A, of the mining economy and B, of the physical economy in Queensland. People are still moving north, they're finding jobs, but sometimes they turn up with a job guaranteed but not a house to buy. Or if they can get into the property market, they're finding, if they're refugees from the Sydney property market, they're finding Sydney-style prices. They're grumpy up there, but they've been grumpy up there for about 4 years. John Howard was the first one to pick this up, didn't know what to do with it. Kevin Rudd caught it with Kevin 07, but the grumpiness returned after the GFC had passed. He didn't know how to deal with it. Julia Gillard couldn't deal with it. I'm not sure a minority Abbott government's going to be able to deal with it any better. That's almost my take-out thought on why the nation, at the top end of the nation, at the mining state level, did what it did to the federal government. Now, of course, why are we calmer down here? Well, we don't have the mood swings that a mining economy has. We've been showered with income, some excess income from the mining boom, but we're not jumping from 2% unemployment to 5% unemployment back to 4% unemployment. It's a pretty smooth trajectory here. The Victorian economy sits roughly in the middle of the Australian economy. The fact that people are content, disengaged, whatever it is, whatever spin you want to put on it, they weren't in a government changing mood, and in fact, if anything, the negativity of the coalition campaign sent them closer to Labor. Now, of course, in the middle of all this is this thing called New South Wales, with the worst state government in Australia, a state government that's gone from black comedy to whatever the next level of farce is. But, and I remind you of this, the hometown boy could not claim a mandate in his own state. Now, whether that means that he needed a bit more inspiration and a bit less negativity, I suspect that is the case, but the same thing applies to Julia Gillard. She could have stopped all those seats falling if she could have given New South Wales an idea that she had a plan for the future. She may have even picked up a few more seats down here. I love the fact that this result is indecisive. It sent a shiver through the core of the two main parties. Now, I don't think this is going to lead us to some new nirvana. Peace, love and happiness was actually not on the ballot papers, so whatever Rob Oakeshott says, I wouldn't pay too much attention to that particular observation from him. Bob Catter, of course, reminds you that if you start messing with your majority and you're going to hung parliaments at the federal level, you're looking at a very distinct regional character warping the national conversation. Now, we're used to this sort of thing at one level in the Senate. We've had the Greens had a crack in the early 90s when one of the two Western Australian Greens who came in on a casual vacancy held up the budget for 2 months in 93 and then held the nation to ransom through the Mabo negotiations. We know that Brian Harradine, who was a bit more wily in his transactions, managed to almost sink Tasmania in telecommunications after the first third of Telstra was sold after the 96 election. And we know that John Howard was relying on him to pass the GST, but he probably did the right thing by the country by saying he didn't want the balance of power on this thing. Now the balance of power switched to the lower house. We are in uncharted waters, but I'm not that upset about it. I wouldn't have thought as a commentator, because I love to see a leader and a Prime Minister and opposition leader who was so afraid of their own shadow going into this campaign been given a none of the above judgment from the people. I think you've got to applaud the madness of the result, and I think there is a chance that one side, I don't know, maybe it could be Labor, it could be Coalition, one side will try and catch whatever the next future wave is, because it may even be the party in opposition gets to rebuild itself quicker. I think the party that doesn't pick up the message that the nation is sending, which from the mining states is service delivery, which from the southern states and from New South Wales is for God's sake, inspire us. The party that doesn't pick that message up may actually be out of power for the next 10 or 20 years at a federal level. Now, the problem is wins in politics always cleanse all sins, so the winner may not actually be the one in this immediate transaction that actually gets it. Now, we've seen one example in the last 15 years where a party got back too early, and that was the National Party that was able to form a minority government after a by-election in Queensland in 1998. They haven't won an election since, and they are now the Liberal National Party. If this thing comes to pass that Gillard forms a minority government, you may not see another federal Labor government after the next election for a long time. By the same token, you could have the same problem for Tony Abbott if he forms a minority government. Those three independents would love to get at the National Party. The National Party would love to get at them, but the National Party will be disciplined by power, one would think, if they get it in minority form. The independents would love to get as many National Party MPs crossing over to the independent column to put them in a position where they're no longer 3 or 4, that guy from Western Australia, but they might be 6 or 7. That's the game there, and the reason why the bush is like this is the National Party stopped representing the bush a long, long time ago. This is the word on the ground. Most people in metropolitan Australia don't think too much about what's going on in the bush, but the first of the big parties that lost connection with its constituency was the National Party, and that was a legacy of 11 years in coalition where they're a little too close to the Liberal Party. I suspect the second party that's lost connection with its base is the Labor Party. The Liberal Party have a pretty good story to tell at the moment because they made people want to turn up. For them, their primary vote is up. Not to a sustainable position in the long run because it's still in the low 40s. You can't build a political movement on the back of a demographic that is ageing. Most people under the age of 50 don't want to know the coalition, but an increasing number of people under the age of 35 don't want to know Labor either. So, as I say, it's all up for grabs.